Hey everyone, I'm Rick Becker, host of the Irish Baseball Podcast, joined by Brian McArtin. And you've seen us rip packs of baseball cards. You've seen us do impossible grids together. Today, we're going to do something a little different. Brian has collected some pictures of Major League Baseball players in jerseys that just don't look right.
Was able to find a bunch of these. There was thank God for Google and thank God for Google image search. And I was able to find some ones that I didn't even know existed. It's the ones that I forgot about. But we got a bunch here. We can go through them and see what we can get.
Let's do it.
Okay, cool. So here's to start with one that I remember happening in the 2000s sometime, when not only is the big unit here in a Yankee jersey, which is bizarre to see, sweet set of braces on him too, apparently having some dental work done in the off season. But this just never looked right to me. And even as like a Yankee fan growing up, like I remember watching this and going, this is great. Where was this 10 years prior to this happening?
Yeah, I mean, Randy Johnson has not only the Yankees years, but the Giants years that I don't think either of those look right. And, great player, but when you go see his Hall of Fame plaque and you see that SF National League and the
Right.
Fly American League, you're like, wait, did that really happen? But it's great if you're doing an impossible grid if you remember it.
When I found this one, it was kind of like jogged my memory a little bit. It's almost like one of those forgotten things that have happened. The Yankees were notorious for taking on players that were way past their time, but Randy was still effective. I mean, and I'm guessing here because I don't have the numbers in front of me. I want to say this was 2005, around that time, 2004, 2005, and the Yankees were desperate for pitching. And I mean, what better than old old Randy Johnson to come out and help out the boys?
A few weeks ago, I checked out a Jacksonville Jumbo Shrimp AAA game. And when I
Cool.
was walking around, they had, the gift shop and everything. And I didn't realize that at one point they were the affiliate of the Expos. So they actually have Randy Johnson, like, they have like a little
Yeah.
tribute to him because he played there because he was with the Expos. Like that's where he came up before he learned how to pitch with control. So, yeah, I mean, there you go. Randy Johnson, one of the best to ever do it.
100%. Seems unnatural. Let's see what else we got here. So here's Canseco with the Texas Rangers jersey on, with the old red jerseys on. And obviously looks like he's been working out in the off season. Looks like he's good physical specimen. I mean, real hard time in the gym there. You could tell a lot of hard work. And this is one of those things, like I remember him playing for the Rangers, but I don't really remember him. I'm so fixed on the Oakland A's Jose Canseco that it's hard to remember those years of the Rangers. All I remember is him hitting 500-foot bombs in Yankee Stadium, later on.
So, a couple things about this picture that I noticed. You see, he has the surgery scar.
Yeah.
And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that was when he came in and pitched and he threw out his elbow. So that looks like he got that surgery done for about $1.87, because who's leaving a scar like that? Certainly doesn't happen like that anymore. But I remember that he came in to pitch and he got hurt. Of course, his time with the Rangers was when he got hit in the head and the ball went over for
Right.
a home run. But he played for a bunch of weird teams. He was with the White Sox for a while. He was with the Red Sox. I believe he was a Yankee for a little bit.
Tampa.
He was with the Devil Rays. Yeah, he definitely bounced around quite a bit there towards the end of his career.
I think everybody was looking for a DH and hoping they can get, a couple RBIs out of an aging DH. But I think by then, but yeah, that scar is pretty terrible. It's like Dr. Nick from The Simpsons did it. Like, it's a terrible looking scar. Let's see what else we got here. Oh, so here's Kevin Youkilis in a Yankee jersey, which this was another bizarre one. Kevin Youkilis, who we were so used to seeing with the big beard, and Mr. Red Sox, like such a big key integral part in those really successful Red Sox teams. And coming to New York, the Yankees were looking for, I believe at the time they were looking for either a first baseman or they were looking for a DH. I don't remember what the dilemma was at that time. There was always something at that time, but it just looks unnatural to me, completely unnatural. And even then, it never made sense to me.
You know, I don't know where you stand on the Yankees and their, facial hair policy, but there are some players that if they're going to keep that policy, they just have to stay away from signing certain players. Like, what are they doing with Verdugo, who looks just like a serial killer without his without his facial hair? And then you have guys like Johnny Damon that they got, and then of course here Kevin Youkilis. Like, these are guys who are associated with that facial hair and just look so out of place. And yeah, he was definitely, you know, Boston through and through. Uh,
Yeah, it never looked right, and I've never been a fan of that's an old Steinbrenner thing, going back, back in the old days, that was a Steinbrenner thing, and I guess they're keeping it in as tradition, I guess, but I've never been a fan of it. It's never been one of those things that I really particularly cared about, I was like, hey, listen, the guy can hit 350. I don't care if he has a beard or not.
and there's a couple things about Euclid on the Yankees that I think actually goes back to the way that they did business for a while. Like, we remember just a few years ago when they were misunderstanding analytics. Like, the Yankees were just trying to get guys with launch angle, but they weren't telling them why they wanted launch angle, and they weren't focusing on the right things. Like, yeah, the analytics are great, but they didn't know how to execute the analytics. And I think in this time, they just like followed the leaders. They were like, Boston was good at analytics at the time. The A's were obviously the Moneyball A's, and some of those teams. And they were like, well, if the A's like this guy, he must be good. If the Red Sox liked this guy, he must be good. And they just picked up these guys who were good analytically, but they never like figured, like, they were always overpaying for guys who were Moneyball guys. So they were paying premium rates for guys who were like bargain bin fines.
Right. And in the previous year before this, I mean, I think Steinbrenner was more of a spiteful guy where he would take anybody who beat him. That was his whole point in getting Reggie. He couldn't beat Reggie, so he took on Reggie. He wanted Reggie. I want that guy. He beats us all the time. And it happened all the time with the Oakland A's. Those late 80s Oakland A's teams were really good. And he wanted Ricky and he got Ricky, like that's how it went. How'd that turn out? It's funny how times change, and the Moneyball era really changed, everything. Maybe it was too much analytics, if you think about it. Let's see what else we got here. Oh, this one. Look at the kid. This just doesn't look right, man. He doesn't even look happy being there.
Yeah, that's one that, to tell you the truth, I don't remember. So I'm hoping that I can store this one in my head for future grids, because I don't know how many people remember this one. Yeah, his knees must have been hurting by that point.
He was hurting at the end of his career anyway. And this was one that when I came across it, I kind of forgot about. And I had no recollection of it at all. And I was like, oh, maybe it was just one of those things he did, he played a couple of games or whatever. So I looked up, I got the stats right here just because I actually pulled them up before because I was curious, like, how many games did he actually play? He played 92 games. He came from the Mets. He played 89 with the Mets and he played 1990 with the Giants, and he played half, like 92 games. So like three-quarters of a season he probably got through. And I'm imagining he probably got hurt. He played 2 more years after that, played for the Dodgers, and went back to the Expos for his last year. You wouldn't even think him, you associate Gary Carter with depends on where you live and who you're a fan of. But I'm in New York, and Met fans. He was the kid. He was Gary Carter. And Expos. If you were an Expos fan, that was your guy. Like for a lot of people. So it's really weird when you see it. It just does not look natural. It doesn't look right.
Just gonna ask you before you change cards. Have you seen the 30 for 30 Once Upon a Time in Queens?
Yes, it's a really good one.
Yeah, that's a pretty good documentary. I mean, it's like 4 or 5 episodes or something like that, but it's really, really in depth and really good.
Kind of piggybacks another, like, if you read the book, the really great book, The Bad Guys Won, which was the book about the 86 Mets and all the the extracurricular activities that were going on, and some of those stories, famously, where Doc Gooden was during the Mets ticker tape parade story. If you can go find it, go look it up. That's a good one. Poor Doc. Um, Here's Joe D, playing coach. I believe he was managing or coaching or something to that effect for Oakland, West Coast guy. And but it is just something about this does not feel right.
Now, was that Oakland at the time or was it
I
Kansas City?
I believe it was Oakland. And again, when I found it, um, more of me being like, this does not look right, but I believe it was, yeah, he was an Oakland A's coach, 1968 and 1969 in those two seasons, which, you know, I looked at this a couple of times this morning when I was putting this together, and I was like, man, Joe, that don't look right. It don't look right.
Yeah, that is definitely a funny one. Kind of like when you see Ted Williams managing for the Senators, even though he was there for a little bit and it doesn't look quite as weird. But just some of these guys, seeing him in a different uniform, like it doesn't matter what uniform it would be, just seeing him in any different uniform is going to be a culture shock. And yeah, Joe D and Ted Williams on different teams, definitely one of those.
There's another one that'll come up in a little bit. You'll see the same thing we were just talking about. So here's Fernando Valenzuela playing for the Phillies. So this is one that I know, like, I believe it was 9 games.
It wasn't
Um,
a lot, but I do remember him being with the Phillies. I mean, this was well after Fernando Mania. Like
oh yeah. I want to
they
say this was
were
the
really,
strike. I want to say this was the strike year.
it could have been. It would have been around. Like, first of all, the Phillies were not good at this time. They had had the one weird 93 year, which I'm going to say something about the 93 Phillies. The one time a buddy of mine and I were like, what was up with the 93 Phillies? Like, why were they so good? And we went back and it was like the exact same team they had in 92. It was just this weird thing where they won a bunch of close games, but nobody like overperformed. Nobody
Hmm.
did anything. It was just like one of those weird things where the wins just happened to get clumped that year instead of being spread out over 2 years. And then they were still just looking for things. And they tried this shot in the dark with Fernando Valenzuela. And I think a really good idea of Upper Deck was to make sure that the Fernando Valenzuela picture with the Phillies was him swinging a bat, because that's really how we know him.
100%. And it might have been because they only had so many pictures of him. Because I want to say I looked it up on Baseball Reference this morning. When I found this one, I was like, I didn't even know that was a thing. And I want to say it was 9 games or something like that. Like he played 9 games and then either got traded or I'm not sure. And don't quote me on the 9 games, but it wasn't a lot. It's a cool one. Let's see what we got after this one. There's the one. There's Griffey playing with the White Sox. This never felt right. And I'm glad that Griffey had 2 homes. I'm glad that he had those great years with Seattle, and even like in the end of his career when he was hurt a lot in Cincinnati. But this just never looks right.
So here is why I am glad that Ken Griffey Jr. played for the Chicago White Sox, because I never would have seen him play in person if it didn't happen. I saw him play against the Orioles when he was with the White Sox. So that's my one time seeing Ken Griffey Jr. play in person. Until the only other time I saw him in person was when I was working for a Major League Baseball team, and I will not say which one because I don't want to let this cat out of the bag. And it was my responsibility that night to be the person at the entrance for Ken Griffey Jr.'s suite on the road when the Mariners came to town. And he was the absolute nicest guy. Like, you see, the kid, right? And you see him with the big smile and the hat backwards, and you think, oh, he seems like a great guy. Honest to God, he was a great guy.
I don't think you ever hear any stories about him being anything other than that. He's pretty famous for being very, attentive towards fans and willing to, I mean, I imagine in the days before everybody has an iPhone trying to take a selfie with you, I imagine it's harder now, but if a kid was holding out a piece of paper or a baseball card or something, he'd always sign it. I've never heard anything other than him being a great guy.
And I'll tell you what, like, the White Sox are such a weird franchise at some points. I have a friend, she's a really big White Sox fan. And at one point, I was just like, who's your Mount Rushmore, right? Like, they do all these weird things like sign Ken Griffey Jr. and other teams that have been around as long as the White Sox. And you can be like, who's their Mount Rushmore? And you have a long argument trying to be like, well, should this guy be on or should this guy? Them, you're like stretching. The White Sox, you're like, do we put Paul Konerko on there? Like,
I was about to say your George Washington is Paul Konerko, I believe. Mark Burley. Like I don't know how much more you do. Is I mean, and I will say I have a good family friend who's in Chicago, and he's since passed away, but he was a diehard Cub fan, like diehard Cub fan, as diehard as they go. Lifelong season tickets, the whole thing. And when I was out there, we went to Comiskey, not what we call Comiskey, whatever it's called now out there after they built the new building, the new Comiskey, they used to call it out there. And, you know, the love of baseball in Chicago is just so universal. And even as a Cubs fan, he's like, well, we've been to Wrigley a bunch. Why don't we just go check out this place? And it was they were terrible at the time. I want to say we caught like 5 innings and left, but that franchise is just such a bizarre franchise with a very, very rabid fan base. That whole they love their team no matter how bad they are. And you got to give it to them because they're pretty terrible most of the time.
well, talking about players who are in weird jerseys, right? One of the things that I would do, just as like my own little thought experiment when I was working for major league teams, is I would always check out the visiting fans and see beyond current players who was the most worn jersey for former players, right? So if the A's were in town, it was always like some Reggie jerseys, but mostly Ricky Henderson jerseys. If it was the Rangers, it was always Nolan Ryan jerseys. You had a bunch of different teams where you could expect if the Orioles were in town, they were wearing Ripken jerseys. With the White Sox, I swear the retired player with the most jerseys worn at away games was Michael Jordan. They all had their either Birmingham Barons or
Right.
White Sox spring training Michael Jordan jerseys. The only other team that was more embarrassing was Cleveland was Ricky Vaughn jerseys.
Listen, that's a good jersey. That's a good one. Let's see what we got after this guy. Oh, there's Hank. This just you know, never made sense. So I mean, the most Atlanta player that you can get out of Atlanta is Hammer and Hank, and here he is in I believe, and it's a Milwaukee Brewers jersey.
Right. Well, he did come up with the Milwaukee Braves. So
Mm.
it was sort of a return home for him, but yeah, it looks weird. Um, I was gonna say it reminds me of another one, but you might have that one later in the list. So
Right.
we'll move on from there. Yeah, that's odd.
Yeah, and I guess it's because of like and I get the whole. I imagine this was probably a deal at this point just to sell tickets. No, I mean the Brewers were an expansion franchise at the time, probably struggling to put people in the seats. Probably trying to get a fan base back in Milwaukee after being gone for so long.
And I'm also imagining that this was pretty close to the beginning of the designated hitter. So teams were still trying to figure out how they were going to use this new thing. And if you were an expansion team and you could tell a player like Hank Aaron, you don't have to play the field, we'll just pay you, one more season. You can get a few more home runs up on the babe and separate yourself a little more. And it would be pretty hard for Hank Aaron to say no to that, right?
100%. Even though it's one of the more bizarre ones I found today, it really kind of like hurt my eyes a little bit. Like that doesn't look right. Let's see what we got now. There's Ichiro. Probably the greatest to do it in a really long time, and one of my favorites. I thoroughly enjoyed this part, by the way, as a Yankee fan. I thoroughly enjoyed having Ichiro around because it wasn't like in years past where you had guys like you talking about Canseco coming to the Yankees and stuff like that, and Euclid. Ichiro could still play. He could still play then. He was still balling.
The Yankees one makes more sense than when he was with the Marlins there for a while. That was another weird one. Yeah, Ichiro bounced around a little bit there at the end, and yeah, it doesn't look right. There's something about it that just looks weird.
I want to say that this picture, like he had some sort of milestone for this picture. And I should have pulled it up before, and I'm sorry I didn't. But it might have been some sort of I don't know if it was like a hit number, if it was like RBIs or something like that. I'm not sure what it was.
Was this possibly when he passed Rose if you combine Japanese and major league hits?
It very well could be, and that's my fault. I probably should have researched that better, but I saw the picture. Now I'm looking at it, I'm like, oh, he's all emotional about something. It must have been some sort of milestone. It's kind of jogging like the back of my memory a little bit. That's a little shot, but I love this picture, and I thoroughly enjoyed this time, as short as it was, just to have him come play. And I remember catching a couple of games with him at home, and we used to sit out in the bleachers, and he was out there playing, and I was like, it's Ichiro, man, how crazy is this? Good time. Let's see what else we got. Yeah, there's Maddox in the Padres jersey, but I purposely went back and found him in the retro Padres jersey for the throwback, just to make it even more out of sorts.
Yeah, Padres, Cubs, and Dodgers in addition to Atlanta, right? I think those were
Yeah.
the ones. I don't know. Did he have a stint on the Yankees too?
No, that would have been nice. I would have taken him any day. But this was it was such a weird one. I came across an original one with like one of the newer Padres jerseys, and then when I was doing the image search, I saw this one. I go, oh no, no, no. We need the old retro jersey there for this one.
Did you ever see the video where it was supposed to be Maddox pitching for the Dodgers and Randy Johnson pitching for the Diamondbacks? And they had Vin Scully doing the lineups, and he was like, "Oh, we have two pitching changes here. Two veteran guys who aren't going to be making their scheduled starts tonight. So instead of seeing Greg Maddux versus Randy Johnson, you're now seeing two youngsters. It's Clayton Kershaw versus Max Scherzer."
Yeah, that's pretty crazy.
Got a
I
pretty good anyway.
one that's not in this collection that looked weird too was Max Scherzer in the Mets jersey, and I forgot to put it in, but that's a good that was a weird one too. Let's see what we got here. It's Pedro with the Phillies. This was a weird one too. Never This was a big part of that World Series run they had was Pedro, kind of coming in, and I don't know if he was relieving or if he was starting as like a fifth starter or something like that, but he still had some gas in the tank, for a little while there.
So at this time, I was working for a statewide radio network in Pennsylvania. So the Phillies signed Pedro Martinez. He made a couple minor league starts. He made one actually near where I live now in Clearwater, Florida. Then he made one in Reading. And then he made his final warm-up start for the Lehigh Valley Iron Pigs in AAA. And I got a credential to cover that. So I go to this AAA game, watch Pedro pitch AAA, and then they bring him into the press room. And he walks into this AAA press room wearing a watch that I think costs more than any house in which I've ever lived. He's a small man, but his watch was gigantic. And it was the day that they also had traded to get Cliff Lee back.
Oh wow.
So this team all of a sudden was, I don't want to get any of these guys wrong, but it was something like Roy Halladay, Cole Hamels, and now they had just picked up Cliff Lee again and Pedro Martinez right at the trade deadline. And they lost to the Yankees in the World Series, but that was a good team. I mean, and they had all those offensive guys. They put up a fight.
Probably one of the funniest World Series moments ever was the "Who's your daddy" chants, coming from Pedro. Yeah, the day he had gotten shelled on, I think it was game 3 or game 2, he had gotten shelled. The whoever it was interviewing him in the clubhouse, and he goes, "What do you think about today?" He goes, "Well, I think the Yankees made me their daddy," or something like that. And he showed up for the next start, and the "Who's your daddy" chants was back page of the Post in the Daily News was the big "Who's your daddy," and the Yankees ended up winning that game and clinching. Such a great day. Well, for me at least, not for Pedro. See what we got here. Oh yeah, there's Piazza and his fantastic mustache and a Florida Marlins jersey.
5 games, I believe, that he played for the Marlins. It was sort of an in between. The Marlins gave up a ton to get him, too. They gave up Sheffield and some other guys. And I feel like this was one of those where a team put all their chips in the middle of the table and then realized before the trade deadline that they just didn't have enough to make a run. So they quickly backtracked and traded him to the Mets. I saw a story about this time and it made me wonder because I don't know the answer to this. Maybe you know the answer, and we can obviously look it up on our phones if we don't. I don't know which hat he's wearing in the hall.
Oh, I don't know at all. I believe it was a Mets hat. No,
Well, I'm
I mean,
going to find out now, right?
yeah, I mean, I always associated him. I know he has that strong connection with the Dodgers, and his godfather being Tommy Lasorda and that whole thing, and you know, him almost. It's always the whole story where they feel like he was almost drafted as a favor. Like the Dodgers drafted him as a favor to his father. And here he comes out as a Hall of Fame ball player. I remember reading this was like 5 games, and it looks like looks just as happy there as they were to have him. Um, but giving up Sheffield and all that, I mean, it seems like it was just a big salary dump on everybody. Seems like everybody involved was salary dumping there.
He is wearing a Mets hat in his plaque.
Yeah, and I don't know how they determine that anymore. I mean, I remember one time I think it was Winfield was when they made the big deal about because Winfield was going to the highest bidder at that point, I believe it was. But
I actually know this answer. So it used to be let up to the player,
hmm,
correct? And when Wade Boggs signed with the Tampa Bay Devil Rays, they gave him, I believe it was $100,000 bonus, but it might have been even more than that. That if he went into the Hall of Fame as a Tampa Bay Devil Ray, they would give him X amount of money. And when he got elected to the Hall of Fame, the Hall said, yeah, we can't. Sorry, we can't do that. So now the rule is the player gets to pick, but the Hall can override it if they find that the player is just completely
right.
out of their senses.
It cheapens it a little bit. I think Winfield went in with the Yankee hat, and that's, as much as that doesn't make his better years weren't with the Yankees. I think he had better years with the Padres, maybe. And then he bounced around all over the place after that. He was another one that went to a bunch of teams afterwards.
I don't think that's an egregious situation though. And
Right.
I know that I believe it's Andre Dawson.
Mhm.
They wanted Andre Dawson and Gary Carter to go in as expos so they could have that part of baseball history preserved. And I don't think that either of them necessarily wanted to be expos, but they were like nudging them that way. And when you get
Right.
when you get elected to the Hall of Fame, you're just happy to be in the Hall of Fame, right?
And that stinks for the Cubs fans who like really adored Andre Dawson and really loved him. He was loved out there, and that's a shame if it went that way. Let's see what we got. There's Pete in the Expos jersey. This was a weird time. This was a weird time for Pete.
He got his 4,000th with the Expos, right?
Sure did.
I actually have, we open baseball cards and you show things. I actually have a signed picture from Pete Rose where he's wearing an Expos jersey. I said, if I ever get something signed by Pete Rose, he's going to be wearing an Expos jersey in it. And
Hmm.
he had a picture there that you could get, and it was him playing an exhibition against the Blue Jays. So it was the only time he ever played in Toronto. And
Oh,
I
that's
was like,
cool.
okay, that's weird. I'll do that.
For me, like I'm 41. So to put it into perspective for age, like this is how I remember him as a kid was because this, tail end of Pete's career, and stuff like that. And I was a baseball card kid, as you know. So like I was ripping cards and I was getting Pete Rose Expos cards, and not knowing until I became, maybe a little older. I was like maybe like 10, 11, 12 years old. I started reading baseball encyclopedia. Remember those, the big giant baseball encyclopedias? My dad used to get me one every year for Christmas. I get the big baseball encyclopedia because I used to ask him, "Hey, Dad, uh, who Pete Rose played for the Expos?" He's like, "Go look it up." I don't know. So then he gave me the book to go look it up. So that's how I remembered him. And then I was like, "Oh, this guy had a whole career with two other teams prior to this." I think he looks just as odd in a Phillies jersey too. By the way, I just picture him with Cincinnati through and through. So let's see what we got here. Yeah, there's Tom Seaver in the Red Sox jersey. This was a strange, strange thing, man, and a strange, strange story. That whole Tom Seaver debacle.
So, who did the Red Sox trade in 1986 to acquire Tom Seaver?
Do not know.
Irish baseball ambassador and former guest on the Irish Baseball Podcast, Steve Lyons.
Yeah, I would not have known that. Would not have known that at all.
Steve Lyons was on the 1986 Red Sox, and he talked about it. We had that conversation because I was like, early in your career and you're on this team. And he's like, we could tell we had something special. Like we knew we were at least going to the World Series. And I asked him, I'm like, would you rather like stay on this World Series team as a young player who's, coming off the bench? Or were you kind of happy to get traded to the White Sox where you could get some playing time? And he said, well, you try to look at the positives, really. You'd say, okay, I'm going somewhere where I can get some more playing time. And that's a good thing. But, looking back on it, when you think you got Tom
Yeah.
Seaver for Steve Lyons, you take that trade any day, even though Seaver didn't end up pitching very much for the Red Sox because he got hurt.
No, and he didn't even get into that World Series. He didn't even get to that end, that end game of that World Series because of, I believe he got hurt pretty early on in the season, and that was pretty much a wrap for him after that. Um,
Could you imagine Tom Seaver coming in and pitching against the Mets in the World Series and just having like an amazing game? Like that had to be what the Red Sox were thinking when they traded for him. Like could you see him in a road Red Sox jersey on the mound at Shea and just shutting down that 86 Mets lineup? It would have been a whole different series if he was still healthy, I think.
I think if he was as healthy as he was at the beginning of that season and made it to the end of that season and got into October, he would have been a force. I don't know if he would have been the Tom Seaver of 1970 something, but he would have, still been a force. And what a story that would have been to have him out there in Queens, pitching for the other team.
I wonder if they handled pitchers more like they handle them now. If they would have just said, you know what, we're going to shut you down for a month or two and let you rest up for the
Mhm.
postseason because we don't need you to make the World Series. We need you in the World Series. So take off July and August when it's hot, and then we'll ramp you up in September, and then you'll come in the playoffs. If they might have been better off doing something like that. You look at a lot of the teams now, they're getting, they have whole pitching rotations on the DL right now, and they're going to be coming back for the stretch run, and the teams are going to be stronger. I just think, and by the way, let's not miss that big gigantic Marlboro ad promoting healthy living in the mid 80s right there.
That's about as good with the cowboy on it too, the Marlboro Man on it. That was a crazy one. So let's see what I don't remember how many more we have after this one. Oh yeah, here's Smoltzy playing with the Cardinals.
I saw John Smoltz with the Red Sox play
Another
pitch against the Orioles. It was on my birthday. The Red Sox got like a 10-1 lead, and then there was a rain delay, and they came back from the rain delay. So Smoltz only pitched like 2 innings because they weren't going to bring him back after like an hour and a half rain delay at that age in his career. And then the bullpen gave up that lead. And I think it was one of only a handful of starts Smoltz ever made for the Red Sox. But yeah, he also pitched for the Cardinals. Just weird looking.
it doesn't look right. It looks unnatural. And I again, this is tail end of the career stuff here, like he was, but he can still go. Smoltz can still go. And now he's making a whole, I think he's golfing now. Isn't that his deal now?
And being a pretty bad announcer.
Yeah, yeah, he's not great. He's not great.
I will say, I think he looked more natural in a Red Sox jersey than he does in a Cardinals jersey. That just looks weird to me.
Yeah, not a fan. We'll move past this one before my eyes burn out. Hang on a second. There's your boy.
It is so funny how much he is beloved down here. I mean, now I live in the St. Petersburg area, and I mean, he's originally from here, so that's a big part of it, right? Like, he was raised here. He played, his community college baseball here. He played his high school baseball. There's literally Wade Boggs Field at his old high school. So it makes a little more sense than it does to outside people looking at it. But still, like, he got his 3,000th hit with the Devil Rays. It was a home run. He was the first player to have a home run for his 3,000th hit. The second one was Derek Jeter. Two guys definitely known for their prestigious
Yeah.
power. He also hit the first home run in franchise history. Those are two yellow seats out in right field to commemorate Wade Boggs' home runs. And they put him in the Hall of Fame last year, the Rays Hall of Fame. I went to that ceremony. Of course, he is now a member of the Irish American Baseball Hall of Fame because he was voted inducted this year as well. So,
So it still doesn't look natural to me though.
no, it doesn't. You also know what else doesn't look natural about that? How is he bald in this picture, but not anymore?
I mean, he has a glorious head of hair now. It is glorious.
I remember he did commercials for some sort of product. It worked.
Whatever it is, it worked. Let's see what we got here. Yeah, there's Yogi wearing the Astros jersey. This I found this today, and this was one of the ones that when I found, I had to go. I was like, I don't remember this at all, and I had to go look it back up. So Yogi was coaching for the Astros with his son playing. Dale Barrow was playing at the time, and he was coaching, his son at the time. But this is pretty awful on the eyes. On top of the fact that those are like maybe top five ugliest jerseys of all time.
They're on the list.
But this doesn't look right. I mean, even when I started going through Yogi again after I found this, I was Yogi in the Mets jersey too, because remember he started coaching for the Mets, later down the road, and I was like, this doesn't look right either. But that I almost see like, okay, crosstown New York thing, I get it. This does not look right.
Well, getting back to the Devil Rays, it's kind of like Dom Zimmer.
Yeah, 100%.
Sometimes those old guys just don't look right on in the expansion franchise jerseys, right?
Well, I don't think managers and coaches wear the full uniform as much anymore. It seems like now everybody's in a hoodie. Everybody's in some sort of something else other than wearing the full jersey now.
Well, getting back to the Red Sox and Yankees rivalry, do you remember the time that the Yankees asked the managers to check, or the Yankees asked the umpires to check if Terry Francona had his jersey under his jacket, because if he didn't, then he's ejected, right? And he
Well,
did have his jersey under his jacket, but he was so, you never saw Terry. Like, can you think of a time that you've seen Terry Francona as a manager, no matter what team, where he's actually wearing the jersey? Like, you only ever see him in some sort of sweatshirt or something.
yeah, well, here's Terry right here. How about that? He just happened to be sitting on the top of the pile when you mentioned him. There he is playing in his Cincinnati days. But yeah, Francona was notorious for wearing the windbreaker. He had the big giant Red Sox windbreaker. That was funny stuff. The gamesmanship. There's the Babe. And this was like, anybody who knows the story of Babe Ruth at the end here, he was just not in great shape here and physically was declining pretty bad, and to a point where they had people running out his home runs for him. He is still hitting a couple of dingers, but the story was that if he did hit the dinger, they had a pinch runner waiting to go for him to round the bases for him because he couldn't do it anymore.
So I am fascinated by Babe Ruth's time with the Braves. And I looked it up the one time, and I'm going to pull it up right here. Because OPS plus rates at league average, right? So 100 is a completely league average OPS plus. Babe Ruth with the Braves had a 119 OPS plus. So that's pretty good. Like, that's almost 20% above league average offensively. And he hit 181. So his power was still so decent
Well, it's just the rest of them didn't work.
that he was able to make up for the fact that he hit 181. He must have walked a ton. And yeah, I mean, he had an on base percentage of almost 360 with a batting average of 181. They must have just been walking him constantly.
Yeah, the storyline in the remember the John Goodman movie, and from stuff that I've read before, the storyline and the narrative that was going on is that he wanted to manage, and I think he went to the Yankees didn't give him that shot because he really thought that was going to be his role there. He would just end up managing the Yankees. It never came to fruition. He went up to Boston and figured maybe he'd be a manager up there, and I think when they told him it was never going to happen, that's when he walked away from it all, and he didn't last much longer after that. He was very sick, and it's a sad ending. But the jersey does not look right on the Babe. Let's just point that out.
And as bad as that John Goodman movie was, and it wasn't great, right?
It's a
But
good bad movie for me. It's a good bad movie. I'll watch it every time. I love it.
I love the scene where his second wife goes into Colonel Rupert's office
Hmm.
and tells him that him and every man to ever wear a baseball jersey should line up and kiss his you know what. And I will like cheer every time I see that because it's 100% correct.
Yeah, this doesn't look right though. So that's the last one I got there.
All right, Brian McArtin, we had a fun time here checking out players in jerseys that just don't look right. So do us a favor. If you are not a member of the Irish American Baseball Society, become a member. You'll get lots of content like this, but you'll also get good content as well. Lots of great stuff going on. We're doing a lot. The Irish Baseball Podcast every other Monday. So become a member, be a part of what we're doing here. The Irish Wolfhounds, the Irish American Baseball Hall of Fame. We're doing a lot. So we would love to have you join us.